I'm going to speak today about Jew hatred, which normally people call anti-Semitism, but I prefer the word Jew hatred because it's more descriptive, and I'm going to explain why. Personal disclosure, I am a child of survivors. I was born after World War II. Both of my parents survived the war in Hungary, and I am Jewish. I also know what it means to be Jewish, since I am a practicing Jew. And most of my life, as most of the child survivors I know, have struggled with this question of why did the National Socialist government hate Jews so much that they wanted to destroy every man, woman, and child, and managed to kill both sets of my grandparents and several aunts and uncles and cousins. This has troubled me all my life, and I've been spending a lifetime just thinking about it. And even today, as we speak, I'm learning more and more about how this came about and what it means for us today. Now, I don't know how you feel about Jews, but I have to tell you that Jews have been misunderstood from before Roman times. Jewish religion has been misunderstood. It's been very different from Roman religion, very different from Greek religion. And our literature, which goes back to before Christ, of course, we have maintained it, and so we know what Judaism is and what the rabbis thought. And unfortunately, the Romans were not great intellectuals. Just to give you an example, the Romans thought that the Jews were very lazy because they didn't work for 1/7 of their life. So that's the Sabbath. You know, they totally didn't understand the concept of taking time to enjoy life and to appreciate what is. Then came the Christians. The Christian church, because it was superseding the Jewish church via the Roman religion, wanted to prove to its members that Christianity was superior to Judaism. So there are a lot of anti-Jewish laws that came about through Christianity, and a lot of anti-Christian, anti-Jewish attitudes, and attitudes such as, Jews use human blood for their matzah, and crazy things like that, which went on into the 19th and 20th century. Sadly, even the Enlightenment, which brought us Voltaire and people who idealized reason, never got over Jew hatred. Voltaire himself had some very nasty things to say about Jews. Then there was Nietzsche and Heidegger and all of these philosophers never took the opportunity to really understand what Jews were about. And that brings us to the 19th century and the Dreyfus case. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Dreyfus case. The Dreyfus case was very significant for Jewish history. Now, in the beginning of the 19th century, we start with the emancipation of the Jews. Napoleon decided to give Jews equal citizenship, égalité, fraternité, and all of that. Jews received equal citizenship, and they were citizens of France, and they thought that everything was okay. But however, the currents of anti-Semitism among the elites and the common man continued unabated, and the Dreyfus case brought this to the fore. The Dreyfus case started with the suspicion that there was a French spy for Germany among the French officers. Dreyfus was the only Jew among these officers. He was systematically framed and tried by a secret court-martial and sentenced for life to Devil's Island. Now, his only guilt was that he was a Jew, and yet all of society was taking sides about this case, and there were the Dreyfusards and the anti-Dreyfusards, and it lasted for 12 years. I think if you can imagine something like the O.J. Simpson trial of the last century, this was the Dreyfus affair from 1892 to 1904. because the evidence was so sparse, and people were thinking that maybe this isn't right. And finally, it was only when Émile Zola published his letter to the newspaper, in which he wrote a several-sided document going through the whole case. And at the end of it, he wrote several j'accuses, and he accused all of the various levels of government that had acted to cover up and recover up Dreyfus's innocence. It was at that point that the president of France offered Dreyfus a pardon, and he went on to return to the officers' corps and to serve in World War I and to die in his bed in 1935. However, Theodor Herzl, who at that time was a young journalist for an Austrian newspaper, a secular Jew, noticed that Jew hatred was not going anywhere. It was really there, and he came up with the idea of perhaps Jews leaving Europe and going back to their native home of Israel and having their own country where they could be free to be Jews and not be hounded by Jew hatred. And that was the beginning of political anti-Semitism and the beginning of the creation of the modern state of Israel. I want to mention another form of Jew hatred, and that's the Jew hatred coming from Muslim ideology. If you read the Quran, you would realize that Jews are called apes and pigs, and the other thing is that Muslims have an attitude that any country that has once flown the Muslim flag must never be taken back on any count. And this is why there's so much opposition by Muslim countries towards the state of Israel. This is the reason that Israel has not achieved peace with the Palestinians. Not human rights abuses, not building settlements. The simple reason is that Arabs don't want to make peace. They want to reclaim the land of Israel. The most recent efforts are those of the BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, that has been perpetrated on American and Canadian campuses and even European campuses, demonizing Israel and claiming that Israel is behaving toward the Palestinians like Nazis, that they're harvesting their organs, when actually Israel is providing water and jobs, and Palestinians themselves are openly saying that this is simply not true. However, the BDS forces have aligned themselves with the left and the human rights machine, and they align themselves with every victim organization, and they claim that they are working for Palestinian human rights, which is an absolute lie, and just similar to the lies about Jews that have been perpetrated for centuries. If you have followed the news, you realize that BDS has been relentless in pursuing this fake doctrine of human rights of the Palestinians all over American campuses and Canadian campuses. I have observed their tactics in Montreal for several years now. Every year they put on a conference called Israeli Apartheid Week, where they claim that Israel is practicing apartheid against the Palestinians. Now, if anyone who knows anything about apartheid and anything about Israel knows that this is an outright lie and fabrication. And yet, academics are supporting this lie, and it's only recently that we have been able to convince people and to expose these lies on campuses and to the general public. And as you may know, recently even the government of Canada has voted against the BDS movement. By the way, if you don't know what BDS is, it's a movement to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel for human rights abuses. And apparently, Israel is the only country that has human rights abuses, not Iran, not Saudi Arabia, not Korea, not Iran, which is a little bit ridiculous. However, innocent students are taken in by this message. Palestinian students infiltrate the student governments, and they propose these proposals over and over again on the basis of promoting human rights. And it has now been voted down 3 times at McGill and twice in Concordia. But they continue to promote this idea all over the world, and they have a systematic strategy of intimidating anybody who stands up to them. And I have been intimidated by myself in these meetings. So I know what I'm talking about. It's not a fantasy. So to make a long story short, I just wish to remind you that Jew hatred continues to be a very serious problem in our own communities and all over the world. And it's up to people like you and me to take a stand, and I hope that you will.